Saquon Barkley to the Eagles. This one got weird because I don't really blame the Giants for going, maybe we can't afford to have this luxury item at running back, even though there's not really a number out there for running backs that you would equate to like luxury money. But it just feels like the Eagles. Like the Eagles will say, we'll just go get that guy and then we'll figure it out. And maybe it's part of the Hurts reception deal where they think they get something out of Barkley they weren't getting from other guys, but that also may be more on Hurts because you can look at some of the numbers with the backs and say like maybe Hurts actually just doesn't throw to those guys all that much because I think Barkley's the complete guy. He's probably, as I said in the open, a little bit healthier than the reputation of him,
Mhm.
the last few years. It's just that when he came onto the scene, you were like, wait, is this guy going to save the running back position? That's not been the case here a few years in, but I just think Howie Roseman and the Eagles like doing stuff like this because there's still a
DeMarco Murray.
name.
Remember DeMarco Murray? Even that was the Chip Kelly era. But like I think that they it's more about it. I think they see an inefficiency at some point where they're like, okay, the market is so low on running backs. Let's go get what is considered a top of the line running back. I completely agree. I think this can work. And also the cap is rising so much that like it's not that big of a risk to try to utilize him in the passing game to destabilize the Giants. Like the Giants fan base is in some weird civil war right now over Saquon Barkley, including Tiki Barber saying you're dead to me. They didn't offer him a contract. They did not offer him a contract. And like the people who seem to care about Barkley's legacy in New York the least are the New York Giants. And so I think the locker room loved Saquon Barkley. I think that they should have done a little more to bridge the financial gap and try to kind of take care of him. Now, this doesn't mean giving him $60 million, but giving him a little more financial security when you're giving out a bunch of money to Daniel Jones, who I don't think is A, the answer, or B, has a lot of respect in the building. I think Saquon did. And so I think this is a fine move for the Eagles. I don't think it's a home run. I don't think it's a disaster. I just think it's in line with the rest of the running back market, which is as the cap goes up is becoming a little more palatable at that position. Now, I think a couple of years ago we swung way too far and being like, all right, let's just draft a bunch of guys in the fifth round and they'll make $800,000 and then we'll discard them. It's becoming a happy medium, and I think this contract is probably pretty good ammo as far as what the future of top tier running backs can be.
Follow-up alert. I have to ask, what gives you the sense that Daniel Jones is not exactly the number one dude with the Giants locker room?
Did you see the Kayvon Thibodeau video? Did you see this at the Super Bowl? So he did.
I lose track of this stuff.
Yeah, he did an interview. First of all, like he's not very good. He's not very good. And like
there's that. Yeah,
there's that. And one thing that is important here is like whenever somebody gets paid in a locker room, and like Bill Belichick was the master at this, understanding the dynamics of, hey, if we pay this guy, then we have to pay this guy. And you hear stories about, like, I've heard stories about Legion of Boom, where it's like the order in which those guys were paid kind of would cause problems. And that's just natural. That's a story I once heard. That's every single locker room. So I think anybody who gets paid in a locker room will always have a target on their back because there's other guys saying, hey, I should have gotten paid before this. There's a couple other things, but more than anything, I think that and this is like not like the best. This is not admissible in court. But if you look at the Kayvon Thibodeau video, you got asked who's going to be the Week 1 starter next year in New York. Like, that was the question. And Kayvon Thibodeau says, Daniel Jones. And then he just stares straight into the camera like Jim Halpert and just kind of like a knowing, like, yeah, I know, man. I don't know about this one. It was an incredible look. But I don't think the vibes I've gotten from the Giants organization, people who just are in the NFL, is that I don't think that they're eager to, lock in Daniel Jones even longer than they currently have. I think they're the type of team where if they could upgrade a quarterback, maybe even now, they would.
This is going to be a good transition into Miami because sometimes you just have teams that are in cap hell because they're planning. Well, they're in cap hell because of bad decisions. They're in cap hell because they actually have a talented roster, or they know they have a big bill coming due. Although the $50 million spike in 2 years in the cap should have alleviated some of these problems. So before I get to Miami and some of the players leaving here, it's just thing that was explained to me, years ago when I was still trying to figure out the NBA and how all these things work is that, whenever you can sign a free agent, other than the obvious ones in the NBA that have already decided, like, hey, behind the scenes, this is where I'm going to want to go, and the winner's curse, right? The curse
Yep.
of, well, wait, yay, we signed this free agent. It's like, why did the other team let him go? The NBA is not a perfect example to it because it could just be the player power of like, I'm just going here, so you're not regretting it. But maybe the tier below that. Okay, hey, this is a player that we really like. Now, the NBA is also a little different too because you just have to spend this money. A lot of times, bad teams are spending on the guys they don't even want and know are too expensive once they sign the deal, but it's the only guys that they can sign. But if you look at, say, Barkley and the fact the Giants don't offer him a contract, right? If you look at Cousins and that Minnesota's like, no, we're good with Sam Darnold. Like, does that ever set off your radar or, even Miami deciding, okay, we can not necessarily afford to lose this guy, but we're not going to make it a priority to keep him. Some of the players that have signed in the last couple of days where I've been like, why didn't they just use the franchise tag on this dude, at least for one more year, and then figure out where you're going to be a year from now instead of just letting this talent walk? Like, are there names, are there players in these scenarios who are like, is the incumbent team telling us something that we're ignoring right now with the headlines of the money?
It happens a lot in free agency, a lot. And I think that, first of all, like the most overrated player in 95% of situations in the NFL is the guy who's just been released. That's kind of a separate bucket where it's always like, like Julio Jones a couple years ago. I think we had an emergency Julio Jones pod. And it's like the league told us they don't care about Julio Jones because he had no market. Yet here we are doing an emergency pod. But separately, like, I think an example, you're talking about Miami here. They let Christian Wilkins hit free agency. And I can't tell if that's just, hey, we can't figure this out under the cap, or like Christian Wilkins is really good. He had
Right.
18 double team pressures last year, which is more than the entire Raiders defensive tackle core. It's really hard to do. I think he was 5th overall in pressures at his position. I don't understand why they didn't try. Like a great example is the Bengals. They franchise tagged T. Higgins, and they're going to ignore his trade request. Like I promise you, they're going to ignore his trade request. People said that yesterday. Like, good luck getting Mike Brown to cave on this kind of thing. They did this to Jesse Bates a couple years ago, where they said, "All right, Jesse, come back for one more year. We're going to play out the string, maximize it, and go from there." I think the Bengals are going to be really good this year, but I think that. I think a lot of times, I mean, almost everybody in free agency is a little bit overrated because if they were actually the player that the market thought they were, then the team would have taken care of them 2 years ago. Now, sometimes it's a positional thing. It's the reason guards hit free agency and not tackles. It's the reason quarterbacks don't hit free agency unless it's Kirk Cousins who does it every 3 years. It's a reason that, a bunch of safeties hit the market this year, a bunch of linebackers hit the market. It's just positions where they don't prioritize getting a deal done as soon as they're extension eligible. I can't figure out the Wilkins thing. I think the Dolphins lost a ton yesterday. I don't think it. I know the Dolphins lost a ton yesterday. They were capped out. They're going to have to spend a bunch of money on Tua. Losing their offensive line when Tua doesn't do as well under pressure. It's not good there. It is not good there. And I believe in Mike McDaniel's ability to grind out an offense at all times, and that Tua is going to be better than he was under Brian Flores and Chad O'Shea and Chan Gailey and all these OCs. But I think that window that was open last year, which, by the way, I think they could have made a serious run if they were healthy. But once the pass rush depth goes, and all of a sudden Jalen Phillips is out for the season, tears Achilles, all that stuff, that window closed. I think they're going to have to do a lot of roster work to return to where they were last year, where they're actually a legitimate AFC threat if everything breaks right. I don't think that's going to be the case for the next 18 months.